Welcome to the Explainer. So, you've done it. You spent hours, maybe even days, building out this complex financial model. You hit enter and poof, a number pops out. But now what? Today, we're going to dive into what I think is the most important part of the whole process, how you go beyond that single number and start using your model to find some real strategic insights.
Right. This is the very first and maybe the most critical question you have to ask yourself. It is so tempting to see that final valuation as the answer, the destination. But here's the thing, that number, it's just the beginning of the story, not the end. Think of it as a starting point for a much, much deeper investigation.
And this is the key mindset shift we need to make right now. We're going to stop treating this spreadsheet like it's some simple calculator that just spits out a single truth. Instead, let's reframe it. Let's think of it as a powerful flight simulator, a tool that lets us explore different strategies, test for a bit of turbulence, and really navigate all the uncertainties of the future.
Okay, so before we can take our brand new simulator up into the skies, we have to run a really thorough pre-flight check. Right? We need to kick the tires, look under the hood, and make sure this machine is actually built correctly and is ready for a real-world mission. This is what we call the validation phase. So our validation process has two parts, and they're both equally important. First up, technical robustness. This is where we're just making sure all the bolts are tightened, all the mechanical parts are connected right. Does the math actually work? Then there's economic consistency. This is all about making sure our model obeys the basic laws of business physics. I mean, do the results it's predicting actually make any sense in a real competitive marketplace?
On the technical side, we're talking about the real fundamentals, the stuff you see here. Does the balance sheet actually balance every single year, no exceptions? Does the net income from the income statement flow where it's supposed to into shareholders' equity? Does your NOPAT, that's net operating profit after tax, give you the same number when you calculate it from the top down and the bottom up? These might sound kind of basic, but believe me, a single tiny flaw here can send the whole model completely off course. A great stress test is to change an input to something crazy, like set the gross margin to 99%, and just see if the whole thing holds together or blows up.
Now this is where it gets really interesting, because this slide shows what happens when you fail that economic consistency check. You see, technically, the math in this model might be perfect, but let's focus on that one key metric, the return on invested capital, or ROIC. That's basically how well a company is using its money to make profits. In this model, it just skyrockets from a pretty reasonable 9.3% all the way up to almost 40%. Now just think about that for a second. In the real world, in a competitive industry, do you really think competitors would just sit back and let one company earn these insane returns? No way! They would swarm in, they'd drive prices down, and they'd compete those profits away. This is a huge red flag that your assumptions have kind of become detached from reality.
So now that we've validated our simulator, we trust that it works, it's time to get into the cockpit. The goal here is to figure out which controls, which of these business drivers, had the biggest impact on our flight path, or in this case, on our company's value.
What you're looking at here is a classic sensitivity analysis. We're just methodically changing one input at a time to see what happens to the final valuation. So if you look at that top bar, you can see that a permanent 1 percentage point cut in selling expenses adds $29 million in value. Whoa, that is a powerful lever. Now compare that to the bottom bar, where reducing your inventory by 5 days only adds about $8 million. This kind of analysis immediately helps focus everyone's attention on the actions that are really going to move the needle.
But here's the catch. The real world is way more complex, right? Strategic choices aren't made in a vacuum. For example, if you want to grow your revenue faster, you might have to accept a lower profit margin. A simple one-at-a-time analysis like the one we just saw, well, it just can't capture these critical trade-offs. And this right here is a much more sophisticated way to see those trade-offs in action. This is called an ISO curve. And what's cool is that every single point on that bottom line represents a different combination of revenue growth and EBITDA margin. That's just earnings before interest, taxes, and amortization, a common profitability measure, that all result in the exact same valuation of $365 million. It shows the team, hey, you could hit your target with a 14% margin and 3% growth. Or you could accept a lower 12% margin if you can deliver a much higher 7% growth. See? This turns the model from a calculator into a true strategic map.
All right, so we've learned the controls. Now it's time to actually fly. We can use our simulator to plan for the future. And let's be honest, the future, a lot like the weather on a long flight, is fundamentally uncertain. So we've got to simulate a few different conditions to make sure we're prepared.
And that brings us to scenario analysis. Look, the goal here is not to perfectly predict the one true future. That's just impossible. The goal is to tell a few very different, data-driven stories about what could happen. We build out a complete financial forecast for each plausible scenario, a best case, a worst case, you name it. And then you can start to really understand the range of possibilities.
Here is a perfect example involving a big new product launch. In Scenario 1, the launch is a massive success. The equity value is almost $3 billion. Awesome. But in Scenario 2, it fails, and the equity value is basically zero. So instead of just picking one, we assign probabilities. In this analysis, they assume there's a 2/3 chance of success. By weighting each outcome by its probability, we land on a single, risk-adjusted valuation of about $1.95 billion.
Now there's a super important warning that comes with this. It's all about the order of operations. As this quote says, you can't take a shortcut here. You have to build a complete valuation from operations all the way down to equity for each scenario first. Only then can you apply the probability weights. If you try to do it the other way around, you're going to make a pretty costly mistake and seriously lowball the final equity value.
And all this really brings us to the ultimate point of the whole exercise. The goal isn't just to land on a number. It's to use the entire process, the validation, the sensitivity tests, the scenarios, to become a smarter pilot, a more insightful strategic thinker. And hey, let's be realistic about precision for a minute. Even the pros at the top investment banks will tell you that valuation is not an exact science. Given how uncertain the future is, they're typically aiming for a valuation range of plus or minus 15%. So it's probably a good idea to keep your own dreams of pinpoint accuracy in check.
And that, right there, is the final takeaway. The real output of your financial model is not that single number at the bottom of the spreadsheet. It's the deep understanding you gain along the way. An intuition for the risks, the opportunities, and the key levers that will truly determine your company's future flight path. So please, don't just treat your model like an answer machine. Treat it like your flight simulator. Get in the cockpit, test your strategies, prepare for uncertainty, and use it to make better, smarter decisions. The only question left is, what journey are you going to simulate first?